York, and no Chris Tillman around. We'll get to some baseball a little later on, but meantime, we got a big football game on Saturday night. The Detroit Lions are coming in from Motown. We know Joe Flacco will be running around with the purple jersey on instead of the red jersey as we get some real game activity on Saturday night, and I think the Lions probably need a little bit of help as well. Tony Ortiz is the morning sports anchor out in Motown at WWJ and 97.1 The Ticket in Detroit, as well as a former sideline reporter for many years for the Detroit Lions radio network. We welcome him in live via satellite from Michigan. What's up, Tony? How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Nestor. Thank you for the Vine. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, a pleasure having you on. It's not often we get together with Detroit. We're figuring that the Orioles and the Tigers a couple years ago got it going. We should hope to have those problems in October. But preseason and fake football, nothing like it, right?
Yeah, preseason football. Yeah, I could. You know what? By the game 3, I'm ready for the regular season to begin, believe me. But this one has some intrigue to it for both teams.
Well, I think one of the intrigues is that there's so many homecoming guys on the Ravens side, from Jim Caldwell and Terrell Austin and, right on down to Anquan Bolden and Haloti Ngata. So at least for the folks who are making the pilgrimage on Saturday, they'll have some 47 memories to cheer upon, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's one guy who's really looking forward in the Lions locker room to coming back to Baltimore, and that's Brandon Copeland, the linebacker. I had a chance to talk to him the other day.
Good man. Good guy.
Yes, but the one thing he pointed out was how hurt he was when the Ravens let him go. And his basic phrase was he didn't quite come out and say it, Nestor, but you get the feeling that he really wants to show the Ravens that they were wrong for letting him go. The good news, if you're a Brandon Copeland fan, is barring anything unforeseen like an injury, he should make the Lions 53-man roster on opening day.
Well, that's big news. He's a good kid. He's a local kid. I had him on about a month and a half ago. He does a ton of work here with kids and charity and kids playing football in the community, which is awesome. How's Haloti Ngata doing? I know it was a choppy ride last year based on his health early in the year.
Yeah, his health was not the good thing for him, and that's why he struggled in the beginning. But the second half of the season, when the Lions made their turnaround, he was key. And this year he is reported to camp healthy. He has been an absolute force when he's played in the preseason in the middle. And that's critical for the Lions, Nestor, because they need their tackles to play well if their ends, Ziggy Ansah and Devin Taylor, are going to be effective in rushing the quarterback.
Does the defense miss Sue? I mean, when you have a player of that magnitude, we had Ray Lewis at a different position, but we never lost Ray Lewis. I mean, we did when he retired, obviously, and then it becomes a trouble for us. But the notion that Ngata was going to be Sue-like, Sue went out in the marketplace, got all that money. I find it hard to believe that a D lineman can impact a game in that way and that it would be noticeable in that way.
Well, it is because of Ndamukong Suh's ability, and teams would double-team him. The one thing you'd notice about that is teams took the chance on double-teaming him, maybe using a tight end or a fullback to chip him. And the one thing was he got so much of the opposing team's attention that it left guys like Ziggy Ansah and Devin Taylor one-on-one with some offensive linemen, and they were able to pressure the quarterback, and they were able to do things when they're one-on-one matchups. Well, the Lions don't have that. Even though as good as Ngata can be, even though as good as Tyron Walker, the other defensive tackle, can be, you don't find teams, Nestor, double-teaming or planning to double-team those guys, so it's been harder for the ends to get pass rushes on the quarterback.
Yeah, I would say that the Ravens, to some degree, last year missed Ngata, and his career was kind of choppy the last few years here just because of the health concerns and how much money it was going to cost to re-sign him. I know Detroit was very happy to get him, and mixing him in, as you said, with other high draft picks. Ziggy's a guy that goes back to Schwartzy, right, and trying to get it done. And, hey, for the Ravens' first-team offense to see this kind of a stout front seven, I think the Lions' front seven should be the strength of their team this year.
It should be the strength of their team, but there's two major questions with it. The biggest question is DeAndre Levy. He only played 17 snaps last year before he got knocked out with a hip injury. The big question is how much rust does he have to knock out, and more importantly, how effective will he be when he does finally take the field for the Lions? The other part of that, too, is the health of the defensive line itself. I mean, Ziggy Ansah is a very good pass rusher, Nestor, but he's gotten zero help from everybody else for the most part the last couple of seasons. Now, toward the end of last year, Devin Taylor did come on and became a second option as a pass rusher. He needs to continue his development. Otherwise, Ziggy's going to be the guy who's going to occupy double teams, and his pass rushing numbers are going to go down.
Well, I think for everyone in the organization, the offensive line has continued to be, a question mark. And as much as Stafford takes a lot of heat, we know around here when we lost Matt Burke and obviously John Ogden after that, the offensive line here has not been as stout as maybe it once was. And running the football, the Lions are going to need to run the football, and they need help on that O-line. I know that that's a big part of the story for you guys watching the fake football on Saturday night.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So far, the right side of the offensive line, Nestor, has been pretty good. Riley Reif, who made the switch from left tackle to right tackle, is playing well. And him going over there has actually rejuvenated Larry Warford, who's starting to play well at right guard after he struggled in 2015. At left tackle, it's Taylor Decker. He's a rookie, so sometimes he misses blocks or sometimes he fails to make a good block. But in the running game, he's been effective. The big problem with the Lions, though, the center, Travis Swanson, and the left guard, Laken Tomlinson, have not developed the way the Lions coaching staff thought they would. And it's shown in the first two preseason games, especially because the Lions have failed to run the ball well or consistently or even effectively. And there have been times, especially against the Steelers a couple of weeks ago, where that pass rush really got to Matthew Stafford, forced him to hurry some throws. And that's not a good sign when you're in a division with a Green Bay, with a Chicago, with a Minnesota, three teams that have really good defenses.
I know we're happy, and I know John Harbaugh and everyone associated will be happy not having to deal with Marvin Jones anymore in the division. And obviously Anquan Boldin coming over to join Golden Tate. Decorated wide receivers, certainly big names, and we questioned how much Boldin had left in the tank 3.5 years ago. And I took many, many phone calls around here, Tony, on Anquan Boldin's departure in 2013. Some thoughts about a guy that is a little bit of a silver hair, but also replacing Megatron, and I don't think it would go unnoticed by any Lions fan that he's now gone. That's a big hole to fill.
Yeah, that's a big hole to fill, but they're not expecting any one guy to fill it. They've told Marvin Jones, they've told Anquan Boldin, they've told Golden Tate, look, you're not going to fill Calvin Johnson's hole singularly, but together, your production could more than make up for the lack of Calvin Johnson. And so far, those receivers, along with T.J. Jones, the fourth receiver, have really taken it to heart. They have shown well in training camp. They've played well in the preseason. The big thing with Anquan Boldin is he gives the Lions a dependable number 3 receiver, which this team hasn't had for years. This goes back to when Rod Marinelli was the head coach. They've really never had that number 3 receiver who has stepped forward and can impact the game. They have that with Anquan Boldin. In turn, he's become a mentor to some of the young wide receivers like Jones, like Quinshad Davis, an undrafted free agent, another guy like Jay Lee. They're learning at the feet of Anquan Boldin, and as a result, that's been the most impressive part of this team so far in training camp and in the preseason, the play of the wide receivers.
He is Tony Ortiz. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at AJ Ortiz and the number 3. And you have a beautiful, is that a Labrador Retriever there? What do you got there?
It's a chocolate lab. I've had him now for about 7 years. We rescued him from an animal shelter, and that's my buddy. That's my best friend. If I go for a walk, he's right there with me. If I go upstairs to the office, he's right there with me. Believe me, he is my best friend.
Isn't it the coolest thing? We got a cat about 4.5 years ago from Baltimore Humane Society here, and I always give them a shout out. We got Dog Fest coming up in a couple of weeks as well. Animals. I mean, it's amazing how many guys like you I talk to who are either sports writers or former athletes or radio guys on Twitter who feature their animal. And I feature my cat all the time. That makes me a softie. I mean, you look like a tough guy with your dog. You know what I mean?
Oh, I love it. I love the fact that so many of us feature our animals and our pets on those things, on our avatars. But you know what the cool thing is, Nestor? I can have a bad day at work. I could have a bad day covering a game. I come home, the dog looks at me, and it's like, I don't care that you had a bad day. Just pet me and feed me, pet me. And you know what? The day just gets better.
Well, if anybody goes to AJ Ortiz 3 on Twitter, they'll see your beautiful chocolate lab here out in Detroit. He is the morning sports anchor for WWJ and 97.1 The Ticket in Detroit. And I guess it all flows through Stafford, right? And you know of my affinity for James Schwartz, and he's now on his third team, fourth team actually, fifth team, sixth team if you count Cleveland and Baltimore back in the day. But bouncing around now and in Philadelphia on the D.C. side, part of this is when a guy like Stafford doesn't get it done, it's usually the coaches and then the rest of the guy. He's the last man standing there and the number 1 draft pick, and I think the heat is starting to fall on him, right?
No doubt about it. And this is a critical year for Matthew Stafford because after the 2017 season, his contract expires. So the Lions have 2 years to basically make the decision whether Matthew Stafford is the guy who they want at quarterback, is the franchise face, and they want to keep him because, let's be honest, his number is going to go up. His salary is going to go up astronomically. And even if they franchise tag him, he's going to get the average of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. And I can tell you there's a lot of Lions fans who don't think Matthew Stafford's going to be worth $15, $20 million for 1 year. So that being said, he's got to play well. He knows what's at stake. He knows there's a contract online for him, so he knows what's at stake. He's got to play well. And the other part of it, too, is so far the front office has said all the right things about Matthew Stafford. If he has a bad season, that could change quickly.
Well, if he has a bad season, the Lions are going to have a bad season. I don't think he could have a good season, and the Lions could still have a bad season. Who's their best player right now? I ask this pretty typically in football season every week when I talk to someone. Would you say Matthew Stafford's their best player?
Talent-wise, yes.
Okay.
Overall, I think Ziggy Ansah is their best player because he can do so many things from the defensive end position. He is the most athletic of all the Lions out there, and he is getting smarter, and he is on an upward trend, Nestor. He is getting better and better as the weeks and as the years go on. So talent-wise, it's Matthew Stafford, but overall, I'd say Ziggy Ansah is their best player.
Another guy we had here in the chain and also has a 47 ring is Josh Bynes. I got to know him a little bit. Good guy out of Auburn, good character guy. Didn't make it here, was shuttled out, but looks to be a starter in Detroit at this point, right?
Yeah, at this point, yes, but he's in a big competition right now with Kyle Van Noy, who was a linebacker they took from BYU a couple of years ago. Right now, Van Noy has a little bit of an edge, but they're not going to declare a starter yet at that position until just before week 1 of the regular season. Bynes really opened up a lot of eyes last year when he took over for DeAndre Levy and played well. That's why I think he's got the edge at this point because he's got a little more of the trust in the coaching staff. Van Noy's a very up-and-down player. He's been a little more consistent in the first 2 games of the preseason. But again, there is that feeling in the back of your head when you watch him that, is this the play where he lets up? Is this the play where he does something stupid? Because Kyle Van Noy, once he makes a mistake, it seems to multiply on him, and he starts thinking about it, and then he stops thinking. He starts thinking harder, and he stops reacting, and that's a huge problem for the Lions.
Heard a lot out of Detroit, and I've been following this forever, and I'm keenly aware of the lack of Super Bowl participation other than the game at the Silverdome back in the 80s. In Detroit, and of course at Ford Field 10 years ago, we tend to forget that one because, the Steelers were involved in that one. So we've blocked that from our memory strip. But, for the Lions to have never made it up the hill, to have had this really stable ownership in a town that, as you know, has not been very stable over the last 2 or 3 decades, given employment and, what has happened to the area there, and I've seen it all decay and now sort of come back to life a little bit. The fact that the matriarch is now running the franchise, what has felt different about it other than the posturing that we saw last year? Because the feeling was, heads might roll. Well, they haven't really rolled yet, right?
Well, there have been a couple of heads that have rolled. Martin Mayhew, the GM for a long time, his head rolled. Tom Lawan was a longtime team president. They were both fired in the middle of last season. The biggest difference between Martha Ford, who runs the Lions now, and her husband, the late William Clay Ford, she's more decisive. She's not one like William Clay Ford was to sit back and maybe let things work themselves out and kind of be hands-off. That's not Martha Ford at all.
Well, he was famously patient, right? I mean, way more patient,
Exactly.
Too patient for Lions fans, right?
Exactly. Lions fans were very critical all the time of William Clay Ford sitting back and just being too patient. Well, Martha Ford is not that patient. She wants results, and she is not unwilling to get rid of people if those results don't come. Here's the funny thing about it. All the years William Clay Ford owned the team, he had a couple of names, but for the most part, he never really had a nickname that stuck. After she fired Martin Mayhew and after she fired Tom Lawan, Martha Ford got a new nickname around here. Her name is now Marth Vader, and that's the way people approach her like that, is that she's the tough owner that maybe this franchise has needed for a while.
All right, man, we had a little tussle a couple of falls ago between the Tigers and the Orioles. We know that worked out better on our end than your end.
Yeah.
You followed this thing, and you know the following of the Tigers and where they sit. The one thing I always admire about the Tigers is that owner there wants to win. He'll spend money. He'll do – it would be very easy for me to put the old Tom Selleck hat on and be a Tiger fan if I was in Detroit just for the effort. We haven't seen that sort of thing here over 25 years from the creep that owns our baseball team. But I would say this. The Tigers look to be on the come. Kansas City looks to be on the come. Obviously,
Right.
The Orioles and these 3 teams in the American League East, it's like nobody wants this banana. Detroit's been kind of forgotten about a little bit because Cleveland's had such a lead. Are you ready to bet $1 on Detroit here over the next 6 weeks to be one of the teams that plays better or worse?
You know what? I would actually think they'll play a little bit better, and I would bet $1 on better, but here's why. They've had a lot of injuries the last couple of months, Nestor, and I think that some of those guys, Jordan Zimmerman's expected to come back, Jose Iglesias, the starting shortstop's expected to come back. Once those players come back, they should be better, but for right now, they are really struggling. They're not consistent. They win a couple, then they lose a couple. They win a couple, then they lose a couple. That's not the way you want to approach this as you get into September and you're in the middle of a playoff race. So I think they'll be better in September, but I think the Orioles, the Blue Jays, the Red Sox just have too much of a lead ahead of them. And you mentioned Kansas City. They've won 9 in a row. The Royals are doing the same thing this year that they did last year. And if you're the Tigers, that concerns you because they do have some showdowns in September against Kansas City. If they're playing well, the Tigers have proven, especially the last couple of years, they can't beat the Royals.
Well, we've learned here to be scoreboard watching, so everything concerns us. Houston, Seattle, Detroit, certainly Kansas City's run, as well as our own mess we have with the Blue Jays coming up next week and the Yankees and Tillman going on the DL. Hell of a year for Verlander, right? And Fulmer as well, but Verlander was, top of the world 5-6 years ago, got the money, and, when Scherzer disappeared, it felt like, is he going to step back up? I mean, he's had a very, very representative year.
Yeah, he has. And the big thing is he has become a pitcher. And he used to be a thrower. He was a guy who knew his stuff was good. He could throw it 97, 98, blow it by hitters. But he's had a series of injuries the last couple of years, Nestor, and that's made him into a better pitcher, if that can be believed. His record reflects it, and he has become the ace again of this Tiger staff, whereas for the last couple of years, it's kind of been, you could say it's been Max Scherzer. You can say for a while there it was Doug Fister. But Justin Verlander is now the ace of the staff. How he goes, so go the Tigers. Michael Fulmer's been good, don't get me wrong, but he struggled in his last outing, and that's a concern that maybe he's reaching the limit of the innings he can pitch. Here's the problem. The depth behind them is not very good at this point without Jordan Zimmerman. So if something happens to Fulmer, he breaks down, he starts struggling, the Tigers would be Justin Verlander and, you hope for something to pop in the next 4 starts, but it's going to be tough.
This is a really good pennant race, right? I mean, it's getting juicier every day. Well, I know you don't want Kansas City to come on and, not lose a game for 2 weeks, but it really is getting a little juicier right now for this playoff jockeying between so many teams.
Yeah, it really is. The American League East is just fascinating to watch because you're not sure if the Blue Jays are going to come out of it, if the Red Sox, if the Orioles, and you watch the Central. Cleveland looks like they're going to run away with this division, so now you start focusing on the wild card. When you're here in Detroit, you're hoping that the Blue Jays, the Orioles, and the Red Sox all beat up on each other and allow the Tigers to do their part and slip back into the race quietly. But again, Seattle's played well. You mentioned Kansas City playing well. The Tigers have to do their part. They have to win, and they have to win consistently in the month of September.
He is Tony Ortiz. You can follow him and his beautiful creature at AJ Ortiz3. He is the morning sports anchor for WWJ and 97.1 The Ticket in Detroit. Hey, man, don't look now, but it'll be hockey season in Hockeytown soon, too, right?
Yeah, it will be. And you know what? The GM, Ken Holland, made news by telling NHL.com yesterday that he doesn't think that this Red Wings team will be a Stanley Cup contender this year. That's not what Red Wings fans want to hear. They want to hear every year that the team is going to contend for a Stanley Cup.
Come on, once every 25 years you got to suck. I mean, it could be worse. You could be those poor people in Toronto, right?
It could be. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be those poor people in Toronto, but that's not something Wings fans want to hear. They don't want to hear that this team doesn't have a decent shot at the Stanley Cup. So Ken Holland's really taking some heat for that. He was already taking heat, Nestor, for 3 straight first-round Stanley Cup eliminations. So if you're Ken Holland right now, you've got to deliver because the fans and the natives here in Hockeytown are getting restless.
Well, I'll tell you what, the Pistons just signed my partner, Brian Billick's son-in-law, future son-in-law, John Lure. So I have to become a little bit of a Pistons fan with my pal Dennis Mannion running the team too. So I have a little Pistons blood in me.
Good, because they're actually going to be a better team this year. And the way the East is shaping up right now, Nestor, I think the Pistons have a really good shot to make it back to the playoffs and maybe get a higher seed. They were an 8th seed last year, faced Cleveland in the first round. You knew how that was going to turn out with LeBron James. So the number one thing for the Pistons to do is to try to avoid facing the Cavaliers in the first round or even in the second round of the playoffs. But the team that they've assembled so far looks to be a better team than they had last year. And Stan Van Gundy's the coach that this squad needs. He is not shy about criticism, but he's also not shy about giving them a pat on the back when they deserve it. So I like what Stan Van Gundy has done. There's a bigger effort now on defense. There's a bigger emphasis on defense. I think the Pistons are going to be a good team this year.
At some point, you got to beat LeBron to win. I'm just saying, right? At some point.
No, at some point, you're absolutely right. And look, Cleveland has suffered a loss or two, but they are the defending NBA champions. And as Muhammad Ali once famously said, you're the champion until somebody knocks you out. And at this point, Cleveland's the big dogs in the NBA.
Yeah, I saw the parade and all that. They'll never let me forget that. We play out there week 2, so I'm sure I'll hear all about it. Hey, it's great having you on, Tony. We'll be following the journey at AJ Ortiz and the number 3 and your beautiful dog. What's your dog's name?
My dog's name is Austin.
Austin. Give Austin my best. Give Austin my powers. How about that?
I like that. Thank you, Nestor, and it's a pleasure to appear with you, man.
Always, man. You got it. Tony Ortiz, AJ Ortiz, 3, the morning sports anchor at WWJ in Detroit. Lions coming in here on Saturday night to take on the Ravens. Luke and I have been out on the practice fields this week in Owings Mills. Joe Flacco going to take the red jersey off, put the purple jersey on Saturday night. We'll have a little more fake football. Not if we don't get enough. You have New Orleans next week with all the backups starting. But maybe Joe Flacco will even toss it around there. Who knows? We're going to be monitoring all of that as well as the Orioles in the Big Apple all weekend long. Any breaking news happens first on the WNST text service. That is brought to you, of course, by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis is here on Thursdays, driving you home from 3 until 5. Our morning newspaper hits your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And if you miss any of our programming, this interview, you want to listen podcast, listen when you want, where you want, how you want, the best way to do that is in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault. You can also download the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear. It's all live and whenever you want it. It's the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault at WNST.net. To reach me, Nasty at WNST.net does that 24 hours a day. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook Live streaming as well as streaming live on WNSTV on our YouTube channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.